Welcome to Unit 5, where we will review dietary assessment methods as well as some considerations for behavioral change. There are three major methods to assess someone's dietary behavior, and this first one should look pretty familiar. This is a dietary record where individuals keep a detailed diary of what they've eaten, typically for 3 days, 2 weekdays, and 1 weekend day. When administering these at professional levels, staff must be trained to provide detailed instructions in order to gather the most accurate of information. Another method is much quicker. Using the 24-hour recall, subjects are asked, what did you eat and drink in the last 24 hours? The benefit here is that it can be done over the phone, but again, staff must be trained to ask the necessary questions to extract those dietary details, which will lead to the most accurate assessment. The automated self-administered recall system has been created by the NIH to help clinicians and researchers with this 24-hour recall. The ASA-24 uses pictures to better identify the quantity of foods they say that they've consumed, and subjects tend to like it. Our third major form of dietary assessment is the food frequency questionnaire. And here subjects are asked questions such as, how many servings of green leafy vegetables do you consume in a week? And these can get quite detailed and most take about an hour to complete. Food frequency questionnaires tend to capture your behaviors in the last 6 to 12 months. So if you take one, it's not recommended to retake the questionnaire for at least 6 months if you'd like to see measurable changes. And this style of assessment tends to be cheap and easy, so population-based food frequency questionnaires have been developed. The Catch Kids Club is for grade school kids and shows pictures of foods and what constitutes serving sizes as well. Of course, these all have advantages and disadvantages. The diet record is the only one that doesn't rely on the subject's memory, so that's an advantage, but you're only capturing a few days, and that's a high burden to the subject and the staff. Plus, if you know you're supposed to be tracking your food and giving it to a health professional, you might be inclined to forego the unhealthy foods when you otherwise would order them. The 24-hour recall is quick and eating behaviors won't have been altered, but you're relying on the recall of the subject and you'll need a trained staff. And the food frequency questionnaire is nice because you can just hand the subject a packet of questions or a computer and not have to train a lot of staff to do so. However, you can't precisely gather information like grams or calories consumed of individual nutrients like you can with the other two. In an effort to reduce subject burden and improve accuracy, the esteemed Pennington Biomedical Research Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, developed a remote food photography method, and here people use their smartphones to take pictures of their food before and after their meal, and images are sent to a server which analyzes it for those calories, macronutrient, micronutrient, and vitamin contents. Internal studies at Pennington show that this method is very accurate and subjects tend to like it more than those other methods that we talked about. So this could be the future of dietary assessment. We'll see how it can take off. So let's talk about the people who may be asking you to do one of these assessments. We have registered dietitians, or RDs, and that's a legally protected title and is only given to those who have completed a degree in dietetics, around 1,000 hours of supervised internship, and a comprehensive examination. RDs can prescribe meals to manage symptoms of health problems, and they can diagnose eating disorders as well. You'll find dietitians working in healthcare settings, at universities, and collaborating on dietary interventions with public health professionals. The term nutritionist has been very loosely used and could apply to someone with graduate level training in nutrition or someone who sat for a certification, but they generally have a background in biochemistry, physiology, and anatomy. Unlike dietitians, nutritionists typically cannot prescribe nutrition, but they can educate clients about nutritional benefits of certain foods and the importance of certain nutrients, so long as they're following well-established guidelines. The Certified Nutrition Specialist, or CNS, is a protected title with similar standards as the RD. They must complete a master's or doctoral degree, 1,000 hours of supervised practical experience, and pass a board certification as well. And there's a bit of a battle going on between the Certification Board for Nutritional Specialists, the certifying body for the CNS, and the Association of Nutrition and Dietetics, the certifying body of the RDs. The certified nutrition specialists cite their equally high qualifications and want to be able to practice nutrition as equals, while the governing body of RDs are working to criminalize those non-RD professionals who practice nutrition without licensure. They're criticized for trying to maintain a monopoly over the entire practice of nutrition. And this battle is at the state level, since states are in charge of regulating if someone with advanced degrees and certifications, like the CNS, can work or receive reimbursement like a registered dietitian can. And here's a current map of the laws in place dictating who is eligible to be a licensed dietitian by the state. The red ones say you have to be an RD to perform nutrition counseling, while the orange states have a pathway to licensure for non-RD professionals. Yellow and green states allow either licensure to perform nutrition counseling, but reimbursement may be limited in those without an RD. Overall, it looks like the momentum is in the favor of the non-RD certs, with states moving towards allowing more people to practice, so long as the certifications are rigorous and require graduate degrees. I know undergrad programs are no longer saying that you need to become an RD to practice nutrition. Let's now pivot into some concepts of behavioral change, and if you've had my health and wellness course, we talk about personal standards of behaviors as guardrails. Now, guardrails, by definition, are systems designed to keep us from straying into dangerous or off-limits areas. And while we understand their usefulness on the road, we can also ask the question, what keeps you from straying into chronic disease? We know that our culture of convenience, stress, processed food, you might say our food culture, pushes us to the edge of the proverbial cliff. But what are you doing to avoid falling into hypertension, prediabetes, and eventually heart disease or even cancer? When I was pursuing my doctorate, I named an initiative after this metaphor. We build guardrails in our own lives in the form of new standards of behavior, these conscious parameters that we set that become subconscious over time, that keep us on the road to health and keeps us away from future regrets. And there are no better places to set up guardrails than your diet in order to prevent these future regrets, because remember what we said in Unit 1, our diets are the number one modifiable determinant of chronic disease, which is the major cause of early death in America. We all have created some sort of dietary guardrails. Listed on the slide are a few examples, including who you surround yourself with, limiting intake to a certain number of grams or calories, regulating food timing, or eating a salad every single day. And if you have these standards of behavior, when you break the standard and you overconsume the sugar or underconsume the salad, you're going to return back to your norm. That's what happens when you don't meet a standard of behavior. You brush up against your guardrail, it feels off, and we redirect for next time. And that's what guardrails do. It's better to end up in the shop than in the hospital. If you were to consume 2 sodas a day, you'd probably bounce back the next day and consume 0. Notice that guardrails aren't vague or ambiguous. We often hear things like drink responsibly or eat in moderation, but those don't really mean anything until you put a number on it. You might be thinking to yourself, I'm not really that concerned right now about chronic disease. Let me live my life and enjoy my food. And that's normal for the younger population. Dietary recommendations are typically much more impactful in the middle-aged group than those who are college age. Middle-aged people already see the consequences of a poor diet, and they already have regret. And they're more likely, therefore, to be willing to take measures to mitigate future negative outcomes. Working in a similar fashion, food rules are general recommendations or rules to live by, often with catchphrases to help you remember them. An example is, if it came from a plant, eat it. If it is made in a plant, don't. Michael Pollan actually wrote a book of them, which I found to be insightful, but there again, I tend to find whatever he writes to be mesmerizing. And here are a few of these food rules. You can read through them. If you take my health and wellness course, we use these in our Eat, Food, and Move project to help drive behavioral change. We also have to approach change appropriately. In the trans-theoretical model, it says that we go through change in stages. And while this was developed primarily to look at addicts becoming sober and identify relapse, we can translate this to any change, including dietary change. Your change starts at pre-contemplation, where you're just ignorant or you just don't care. You don't have any intention to change in the next 6 months. But then you've heard about the pros of changing, or maybe the cons of not changing, and it's put you into contemplation. Here you're considering change. Once you have a date in mind to change, typically within the next month, or you've made some subtle changes but you haven't really fully bought in yet, then you're in preparation. From there, you can make your change and it's uncomfortable, but you're pushing through. That's the action phase. If you stay with your new behaviors for 6 months, you make it to maintenance phase. And you're still substituting your old behaviors with alternatives, and you're consciously keeping yourself away from situations that might cause a relapse. Eventually, though, you might get to the desired point, and that's called termination. And here there's a 0% chance of you returning to your previous ways. This is thought to take at least about 5 years of maintenance to achieve the termination phase. If you have a few dietary changes that you've identified for yourself, think about what stage you're in for those changes. And this was an interesting paper that describes some reasoning behind why people eat the way they do. Sometimes life gets in the way. You can consider these in the way reasons that we don't eat healthy as barriers. And the top barrier was lack of time. You could probably predict that. It's tough to eat healthy when you don't cook, and it's tough to cook when you simply don't have the time to do so. When convenience wins over, our health tends to lose. And we can all agree that food can be expensive, and healthier produce can be much more expensive than the processed food a few aisles over. Cost is a large barrier to healthy eating, especially in the low-income members of the community. And reforms to the SNAP program can hopefully help make healthier food more attainable from a cost perspective, but what about being more available from a location perspective? Many people are limited to unhealthy eating based on geography, their isolation, and needing to travel long distances to get food in rural areas or not having healthy options nearby in urban areas. The term food deserts applies to these areas which present these disadvantages. The fourth barrier was one that we can all relate to. We often find ourselves in situations at parties or gatherings that just don't have many good options. There's a critical mass that needs to buy into the recognition of healthy food. Until you reach that, expect to find burgers, hot dogs, pizza, and wings. Not that long ago, I was at an event for disabled individuals at an amusement park in Pennsylvania, and they fed us lunch at lunchtime. And none of you would have considered any of the options real food. Unfortunately, most of those attending and working the event viewed it as a normal lunch. It was shocking to see. While barriers get in the way of healthy behavior change, facilitators help you out. These include growing food yourself or having access to local farmers markets or farm shares. Hopefully this class can be a facilitator as well. Education tends to do that, and so does surrounding yourself, again, with healthier people with these same priorities as you. But understand that we have a balance of barriers and facilitators, and whoever has more tilts the scale in certain directions that ends up determining which foods that we end up choosing. My wife is a researcher in childhood obesity, and in her field they have a somewhat new model which encompasses the aspects of what's known as physical literacy. And this includes the physical competence. They think about their fitness levels, motor skills, ability to perform tasks in common sports like kicking and throwing and such. Then there's confidence, which gets at the self-efficacy and self-concept, how well they think that they can perform. The third component is motivation, which includes how much the individual understands the importance of physical activity and how much they value it in their life. And these all go hand in hand. With improved physical ability comes greater confidence and greater motivation to continue doing it. And you can start at any one of these and improve all of the others. So this got me thinking, what about dietary literacy? It should work in similar ways. Maybe you can add to this. This is just something I put together. It's by no means published work or anything. But I think we are at the time in the semester to consider the aggregate dietary literacy. And this likely includes the competence in food preparation, which involves skills such as cooking or meal planning, being able to add and subtract ingredients as you see fit. You can call that taste identification or development of a good palate, and even your ability to grow your own food as well. Then there's consumer confidence, which we've focused on a fair amount. This includes trusting credible sources of nutrition advice, not falling for food marketing that's not in your best interest, understanding food labeling and what to look for, and maybe alongside that we can throw in personal food rules, those guardrails that you keep to keep from straying off into dangerous aisles or sides of the menu. But it's all for naught if we know better but aren't motivated to do better. Along with competence and confidence must come motivation, which includes a certain level of ambition to try new recipes, value quality of food over quantity of food, and even add a willingness to invest in your health by spending perhaps a little bit more on food. And scales are often devised to quantify a population or individual's literacy. And I'm not sure what's been published in the field of nutrition quite yet, but I think it's necessary to think about all of these domains together and not just independently. The Dr. Lustig lectures hit on some of the flaws with the simple energy balance equation. Still, when studies control energy intake and expenditure in a laboratory setting, the laws of thermodynamics stand. If you expend more energy than you take in, then you end up losing weight. And it takes about 3,500 calories to burn 1 pound of fat. That's a pound a week on a 500 calorie a day deficit. However, as the 95% of dieters who have gained the weight back know, it's not all that simple. There are alterations at the site of the brain and at endocrine organs, including the adipocytes and skeletal muscle, and our biochemistry drives our hunger levels and rates of energy expenditure and our desire to get up and move. Overall, diets are restrictive, with rules to exclude, or eat less of at least, certain foods or nutrients, for the purpose of ending up with deficits in this energy balance equation. And then there's an alternative to restrictive dieting. Instead of exclusion, you could try inclusion. And here's one such model with Dr. Greger's Daily Dozen, the topic of your third and final dietary intake assignment. Here, the goal is to check off as many healthy food items off of a checklist meant to encourage you to consume a variety of whole foods. The idea here is that by training yourself to make the attempt to include all of these health-promoting foods, you simply won't have room on your plate for the unhealthy ones. Eat whatever you want, just be sure to include these foods. That's what this model says. Plus, along the way, you might just find some recipes or food preparation techniques that turn out to be weekly staples long term. In 2011, the behavior change wheel was developed to classify various targets for behavioral change. And you can target policies that affect the behaviors of populations of people. We've talked about the nutrition facts label, sugary sweetened beverage taxes, and the USDA's dietary guidelines put forth every 5 years. And back in Unit 1, we talked about how the Farm Bill uses food subsidies to promote the production of certain foods and provides lower income individuals with the SNAP program to be able to afford foods. And you can make parallels to how policy changes severely affected the use of tobacco products through restrictions on marketing and taxation as well. The next level in red is interventions. And this is often the source of large research projects in the field of public health as they seek to identify the most effective ways to change behavior in specific groups. Some programs use financial incentives, while others focus on educating kids about the health influences of food. Others use modeling to lead by example or train individuals to shop for or prepare healthy foods. And then there's always restrictions, like removing soda machines from schools and seeing what happens. The Green Center describes the determinants of individual behavior, similar to what we discussed a few slides ago with competence and motivation, but also opportunity, which may be influenced by someone's education, social persuasion, incentives, or larger scale influences, such as how their town sets up for them to eat well, and how much exposure someone might have to healthful and not so healthful food marketing. If you go on to courses or a career in public health, you'll find models like these help serve as backbones of behavioral interventions and encourage researchers and policymakers to consider as many circumstances as possible related to behavior.